Hi, in this lecture I'm going to explain the differences between absolute and relative cell references. So, Excel has two types of references, absolute and relative. Now, an absolute reference is when you fix either the letter column part of the cell reference or the number row part of a cell reference, or both. And a relative reference is when either the letter column part is not fixed or the number row part is not fixed, or both are not fixed. Now, just to clarify what a cell reference is, it's basically the combination of the letters here, which represent the columns in Excel. So if I clicked here, you can see that it's going downwards, which is our columns, and the number part, which is here. And these represent the rows. So if I clicked here, for example, I6, so this is telling us that this cell here intersects between column I and row 6. Okay, so what denotes a fixed or absolute reference in Excel? Well, it's the dollar symbol. Now, references in Excel by default are entered in as relative, so without the dollar symbol. Now, which is correct? Absolute or relative references? Well, there is no right or wrong. It depends on your situation. For example, for sheets where you would need to drag down cells to perform a recurring formula, most people use relative references. So I've just done a quick table to give you an example of all the combinations of references we can have between going from absolute to relative. Okay, so just looking at our table, if we take the cell reference B2, and we start from making it an absolute reference, and then we slowly go all the way down till it's relative. So to fix both the column and row for an absolute reference, we put the dollar sign before the column and the dollar sign before the row. So in this form, this cell reference is absolute in both column and row. Now, we can also just have mixed variations. So, for example, in this cell, the reference is an absolute column and relative row. In other words, we've just fixed the column bit, and the row bit we've left as relative. While in this one here, $2, the reference is relative, the column part, but the row is absolute. In other words, we fixed the row. While our last variation is where our reference is relative in both column and row. Now, just to translate the terms absolute and relative, basically, whenever you think of absolute, think of it as fixed. In other words, it will not change if you move the cell formula location. So whatever part you fix of the cell reference will not change. In other words, whatever part you add the dollar symbol, it won't move. While relative, just think of it as relative to the cell location. So in other words, it will change if you move your cell reference to another cell. Now, to give you an example of how references work, I've got an example. So, as an absolute reference, if I wanted to sum these numbers, 20, 30, 50, 60, I would basically write sum brackets $ be $30, and because we're summing a range, we've got the two dots, and then our end point, which is a $C $31. Right. So as an absolute reference, it won't change if we drag the cell to another location. So for example, if I went down 2, I'd get 160. If I went to the right, I'd get 160. To the left, I'd get 160. If I went up, I'd get 160. Now, let's just take a look. In our original cell, we can see this blue range is fixed with this rectangle. If we went to the left, you can see again, it's fixed. If we went to the right, it's fixed. Went to the top, it's fixed. If we went down, it's fixed. If we went down again, it's fixed. So you can see here, those dollar symbols basically stopping this cell reference from basically moving and giving us different values because we fixed its location. So that's an absolute reference. Now, going to the other end of the spectrum, a relative reference. Here, the formula would be sum brackets B30 2 dots C31 close bracket. Now, if I went down to, you can see automatically I've got different answers. If I go to the right, I've got a different answer. If I go to the left, I've got a different answer. If I go to the top, I've got a different answer. Why is this? Well, it's relative, which means as we move the cell reference, the location will change along with it. In other words, it's relative to its location. So for example, here, this is where we started off. So we've got our 4 numbers selected. Now if I go to the left and go into the formula, can you see? The rectangle has shifted. Because we shifted one, the rectangle, in other words our selected range, shifted one as well. Similarly here, because we shifted one up, it's relative, so the rectangle shifted one up. And again here, we shifted to the right, so the rectangle shifted to the right. We go down, the rectangle shifts one down. We go down again, the rectangle shifts down again. And coincidentally, we get no numbers, which is why we've got 0. And the reason we get 70 here is because 20 add 50 is all that's being summed up. So we get 70. And then similarly here, 30 and 60 is all that's being summed up, so we get 90. And then for the 50, we get 20 and 30. So that's a relative reference in terms of when it's completely relative, both the column and the row. Now, we can have our variations. So if we had an absolute column and a relative row, then we would write it in Excel like this. We would only put the dollar symbol before the letters, while the number part would remain on its own with no dollar symbol. So let's see what happens when we drag down. Okay, so we're already getting different results. Drag that way and drag that way. Starting off here, we can see our blue rectangle. Then we move to the left, it's still in the same position. We move to the right, it's still in the same position. Then we go up. Can you see that? It shifted up. Now, the reason it shifted up is because we basically told Excel to fix the column, but keep the row relative. So in other words, the row bit will change even though we're still in the same column. Now, similarly, when we went down with the formulas, it's the same thing. Our columns are fixed, but the row, because it's relative, has shifted relative to the location of our new formula, which is just one down. So we get 110. And similarly, when we go down once more, we get nothing because again it shifted. So that's an example of an absolute column and a relative row reference. Now our last variation is a relative column and an absolute row reference. Now to do this, folks, you basically put the dollar symbol before the number part of each cell reference. So just applying the same theory here, we go down to, and then we go to the right, then we go up, and then we go left. Okay, so let's take a look at how we're getting different number results. So starting off here, 160, if I go in, you can see our blue rectangle is there. Now if I go up, you can see again, our blue rectangle hasn't changed position. And similarly, if I go down, and down again. But if I go to the right, you can see the rectangle shifted one. If I go to the left, it shifted one. The reason being is because we have basically told Excel, fix the row, but change the column. So when we're going up and down, the row won't change because it's been fixed. However, if we go left to right, the column will change because it's relative. And that's the reason we're getting our different numbers. So that is a good example of the types of references we can have in Microsoft Excel. Okay, so that concludes this lecture. We have overviewed absolute references and relative references, and also their intermediate combinations. Thank you for listening and watching. If there are any questions or queries, please feel free to reach out.